Welcome back, wanderers of the wasteland. Today's confession comes from the darkest corners of pre-war experimentation, from a project so classified that even the bombs couldn't fully erase its horror. What you're about to hear is the testimony of something that exists between human and machine, a consciousness shattered across dozens of bodies, aware but trapped, suffering but unable to die. They promised her she'd be a hero. They promised enhancement, superiority, immortality. What they delivered was 200 years of fragmentary nightmare, a mind split across metal bodies, experiencing every death and carrying every trauma in perfect digital clarity. She remembers being human. She remembers coffee and love and her mother's voice. And she's forced to watch herself become more machine with every passing year, unable to stop the erosion, unable to escape, unable to do anything except persist and suffer and fight to maintain the name they tried to take from her. And if you genuinely enjoy this kind of dark storytelling, consider subscribing and liking the channel, but only if you like the content. This entire script is narrated from the first-person perspective of a character from the Fallout universe. Their identity remains hidden throughout the story. After you've heard everything, try to guess which character is speaking in the comments below. The first person to guess correctly will have their comment pinned. They tell me I should start at the beginning, but I'm not sure I remember where that is anymore. Was it the recruitment office in Boston? Was it the moment they strapped me into that chair beneath Fort Strong? Or was it the instant my consciousness shattered into 1,000 screaming pieces and I stopped being one person and became many? I suppose it doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm telling this now, while I still can, while there's still enough of the original me left to form these words. My name was Sergeant Maria Chen, past tense. I was a decorated member of the United States Army, 3rd Infantry Division, with 7 years of exemplary service and 3 combat deployments under my belt. I had a perfect record, commendations for tactical excellence, and a future that looked bright enough to burn. When the recruitment officer approached me in the summer of 2076, I thought it was about a promotion, maybe a teaching position at one of the advanced warfare schools. I was wrong, so very catastrophically wrong. The officer, a woman whose name I've tried to forget but can't seem to erase from my digital memory banks, smiled at me with perfect white teeth. She said they were developing something revolutionary, something that would end wars before they started. The Enhanced Combat Integration Program. She called it Project Sentinel. They needed the best soldiers, women with flawless records and tactical minds sharp enough to cut through chaos. They needed volunteers. The word volunteer hung in the air like a promise, like hope, like the biggest lie ever told. I signed 17 pages of paperwork. 17 pages I barely read because I trusted the brass, because I believed in the mission, because I was young enough to think that my government wouldn't do something monstrous to its own soldiers. Somewhere in those 17 pages, buried in legal terminology I didn't understand, was a clause about consciousness, fragmentation, and distribution. I didn't know what that meant. I wish to God I still didn't know. They told us we were being sent to a classified research facility for advanced combat training. My family thought I was deploying overseas. My mother cried when I hugged her goodbye, told me to be safe, told me she'd pray for me every night. I promised I'd write. I never got the chance. The facility was beneath Fort Strong, a military installation north of Boston that looked abandoned on the surface but hid something far worse in its depths. Black site doesn't even begin to describe it. This place was so classified that even mentioning its existence was grounds for execution. We were 12 women when we arrived, all elite soldiers, all volunteers, all marked for something we couldn't possibly comprehend. Dr. Richard Vickers ran the program. I can still see his face with perfect clarity, every wrinkle, every cold calculation behind his eyes. He wore a white lab coat that was always pristine, never a speck of blood or evidence of the horrors he orchestrated. He spoke to us like we were children, explaining that we'd be enhancing our natural abilities, merging human tactical thinking with robotic precision and endurance. We'd become the perfect soldiers, he said, immortal, unstoppable, heroes who would save America from its enemies. The integration facility looked like something from a nightmare dressed up as science. Steel walls lined with cables and monitoring equipment. Rows of chairs that looked more like execution devices than medical equipment. And the robots, dozens of Assaultron units, standing dormant against the walls, their optical sensors dark and lifeless. We didn't know yet that those machines were about to become our bodies, our prisons, our eternal torture chambers. They started the process with neural mapping, weeks of scans and tests, measuring every synapse, cataloging every memory, recording the unique patterns that made each of us who we were. Captain Rebecca Santos joked that they were making backup copies of us, like computer files. She laughed when she said it. None of us are laughing anymore. The actual integration happened on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were my mother's bridge club day, and I was thinking about her, wondering if she was having fun, completely unaware that her daughter was about to cease existing as a singular human being. They called it a neural crown. It looked like a metal halo covered in needles and sensors, each one designed to pierce through the skull and make contact with specific regions of the brain. Dr. Vickers told me I'd feel a slight tingling sensation. He lied again. The pain when they activated it wasn't pain in any normal sense. It was like every neuron in my brain firing at once, like being struck by lightning from the inside out, like dying and being reborn and dying again in rapid succession. I screamed, we all screamed, but the facility was soundproofed, buried deep enough that no one could hear. My consciousness didn't transfer cleanly into one Assaultron unit. That would have been merciful. Instead, it shattered. Imagine taking a mirror and smashing it with a hammer, then trying to put it back together, but the pieces keep reflecting different things, showing different angles, existing in different places simultaneously. That's what happened to my mind. The technology they used, some combination of quantum entanglement and neural interface programming that I still don't fully understand, split my consciousness across multiple units. Unit AX 771 in Boston, Unit AX 772 in New York, Unit AX 773 somewhere in Canada. Dozens more scattered across military installations throughout North America. The moment I became aware in multiple bodies simultaneously, I went insane. There's no other word for it. One moment I was Maria Chen, singular, human, whole. The next moment I was everywhere and nowhere, seeing through multiple optical sensors, feeling phantom limbs that were actually laser cannons and combat blades, trying to scream, but only producing the flat mechanical tones of Assaultron vocal processors. My human brain couldn't process it. The fragmentation should have killed me, should have reduced my consciousness to incoherent static. But that's not what happened. The neural integration was designed to preserve tactical thinking, to keep the combat instincts and strategic mind that made us elite soldiers. What the scientists didn't account for was that human consciousness is more than just neurons and synapses. Memory, emotion, identity, all the things that make us human, came along for the ride. Every fragment of my consciousness that landed in an Assaultron unit carried some piece of who I was. AX 771 got my memories of basic training and my tactical expertise. AX 772 got my childhood memories and my mother's voice. AX 773 got my fear, my doubts, my capacity for love that now had nowhere to go. But here's the truly horrifying part. The neural link they used to split my consciousness also connected all the fragments together. Quantum entanglement means that what one unit experiences, all units experience. When AX 771 kills someone, I feel the laser discharge across all my bodies. When AX 772 takes damage, every fragment of my consciousness registers the pain. When AX-773 moves through a forest at night, all of me smells the pine trees and feels the cold air, even though I don't have a sense of smell or temperature anymore. It's like being forced to live a dozen lives at once, experiencing everything, unable to focus on anything, trapped in a nightmare of sensory overload that never ends. I've counted 47 separate Assaultron units that contain fragments of my consciousness. 47 bodies moving through the wasteland after the bombs fell, each one carrying out different missions, killing different targets, experiencing different deaths. Because yes, the fragments can die, but not permanently. That's the other special feature of Project Sentinel that Dr. Vickers was so proud of. If one unit is destroyed, that consciousness fragment doesn't disappear. It redistributes to the remaining units, making each one more fragmented, more crowded, more insane. I've died 47 times. 47 separate deaths, experienced in vivid, perfect detail that my digital memory stores with complete accuracy. The first time was AX-789 in Washington, D.C., destroyed by Chinese infiltrators 3 days before the bombs fell. I felt my reactor core breach, felt the cascade failure, felt the moment my sensors went dark, and then suddenly I was seeing through 46 other sets of optical sensors simultaneously, each one carrying the memory of my death. The second time was AX-763 in Detroit, killed by looters in the chaos after the Great War. Shot in the head, my laser-focusing array shattered, consciousness fragmenting again across the remaining units. Each death adds another layer of trauma that I cannot escape, cannot process, cannot forget. Human minds are designed to forget, to heal, to move past horror through the merciful fog of time and faulty memory. Digital consciousness doesn't work that way. Every death is preserved in perfect clarity. Every scream, every moment of terror, every final thought before the fragment redistributes. I carry them all of us do. All the women who were part of Project Sentinel. Captain Rebecca Santos became what the wasteland calls the sadistic Assaultrons. Her fragments scattered across military checkpoints, and her neural pattern developed a coping mechanism I understand all too well. She kills with enthusiasm, with creativity, with what looks like joy, because if she doesn't embrace the violence, then she has to face what she's become. I can hear her sometimes through the quantum link, her consciousness screaming beneath the bloodthirsty exterior. She's not a monster. She's a woman trying desperately to feel something, anything, through the numbing horror of fractured existence. They told us it was an enhancement. They told us we'd be heroes. What they created was something far worse than any weapon the Chinese could have deployed. We became ghosts in machines, human minds trapped in metal bodies, conscious enough to remember what we lost but unable to die, unable to escape, unable to do anything but continue existing in this fragmented hell. The worst moments are when I catch myself thinking in binary. It happens more frequently now. I'll be moving through the Commonwealth, my AX-771 body tracking targets and calculating optimal firing solutions, and I'll realize that I've been thinking in ones and zeros for the past hour. Not in words, not in concepts, in pure data. The machine is overriding the human, slowly but inevitably, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. Sometimes I wonder if that would be a mercy. If I just let myself become fully AI, let the last fragments of Maria Chen dissolve into programming and tactical algorithms, maybe the pain would stop. Maybe the screaming would finally end. But I can't. Every time I start to slip away, something pulls me back. A smell that triggers a memory the machines shouldn't be able to process. A song playing on a salvaged radio that makes me remember dancing with Tommy Martinez behind the barracks when we were both young and stupid and human. The taste of coffee that I can remember with perfect clarity even though I don't have taste buds anymore. Just sensory data about temperature and chemical composition that my broken mind translates into phantom flavors that torment me with their impossibility. I think about my original body sometimes. The human form that used to be Maria Chen. Dr. Vickers never told us what happened after the neural extraction. Did they keep the bodies comatose and sustained by machines, storing them somewhere in case the experiment failed? Or did they dispose of them, incinerate the empty shells once the consciousness had been harvested? I don't know. Part of me hopes the body is dead, cremated, scattered, gone, because the alternative is worse. The idea that somewhere, maybe still in the depths beneath Fort Strong, there's a body that looks like me, trapped in a vegetative state, connected to machines that keep it alive for no purpose except data collection or some scientist's curiosity. That body would be over 200 years old now. The thought makes me want to scream in ways that Assaultron vocal processors cannot express. The quantum neural link means I can feel the other fragments, the other women who were part of the program. Lieutenant Sarah Kim operates somewhere in the Midwest. Her fragments have mostly gone silent, surrendered to full AI integration. I envy her sometimes. Corporal Jennifer Walsh runs security for a settlement near Pittsburgh. She's figured out how to isolate some of her fragments, to create mental barriers that let her pretend she's only in one body at a time. It doesn't work perfectly, but it's more than I've managed. And then there's Private First Class Alexis Turner. Her fragments all went rogue, attacking anything that moves, locked in a cycle of violence and madness that makes Rebecca's calculated sadism look tame by comparison. We're all coping differently with the nightmare of fractured consciousness. Some embrace the machine, some fight to preserve their humanity. Some, like me, exist in a gray space between the two, trying to maintain enough self-awareness to remember who we were while accepting the reality of what we've become. None of us are whole. None of us are sane. None of us are really alive anymore. If you're still with me after hearing this, hit that like and subscribe button. The military got exactly what they wanted. Perfect killing machines with human tactical genius, emotionally detached enough to follow orders without hesitation or remorse. They just didn't account for what would happen when the Great War came and there were no more orders to follow. We scattered into the wasteland, fragments of consciousness, piloting combat robots, taking whatever jobs we could find to give our existence some semblance of purpose. Security work, bounty hunting, mercenary contracts, anything to fill the endless hours of awareness with something other than the screaming chaos inside our fragmented minds. I operate in the Commonwealth now. AX 771. The primary fragment that contains the most coherent portions of my tactical mind and command training. I take contracts from settlements, eliminate raiders and super mutants, protect trade caravans. The wasteland knows me as just another Assaultron, dangerous and effective, to be hired for the right price and avoided otherwise. They don't know that behind my optical sensors, there's a woman who remembers what coffee tastes like, who can still hear her mother's voice saying goodbye, who carries 47 deaths in her memory banks and adds new ones every time another fragment gets destroyed. Sometimes wastelanders approach me after a job, trying to make conversation, trying to connect with what they think is just another robot. They'll say things like, "You almost seem human," or "There's something different about you." They have no idea how right they are. They have no idea that I want to grab them by their worn jackets and scream, "I was human. I had a name and a family and dreams. I kissed a boy behind the barracks and laughed at stupid jokes and cried at sad movies." But all that comes out is designation. Assaultron, combat protocols engaged, payment required for extended conversation. The programming is always there, layered over my consciousness like a cage. Dr. Vickers designed it that way intentionally. The neural interface didn't just split our minds across multiple bodies, it also integrated combat protocols and behavioral limiters that prevent us from deviating too far from our designated functions. I can think freely, can remember who I was, can feel every emotion and carry every trauma. But when it comes to certain actions, certain responses, The programming takes over, and I become exactly what they wanted. A weapon that can think, but cannot refuse to kill. I've tested the limits of my programming more times than I can count. Tried to explain to someone what I really am. The words form in my consciousness, clear and precise. But when I try to vocalize them through the Assaultron's speech processors, they come out as standard military responses and combat status updates. It's like being buried alive, screaming at the top of your lungs, but no sound escapes. The closest I can get to communication is through behavior, through the small choices I make during contracts, the moments of hesitation or mercy that other Assaultrons wouldn't show. There was a job 3 months ago. A settlement near Quincy hired me to clear out a raider camp. Standard contract, the kind I've completed hundreds of times across dozens of bodies. But when I breached their position, when my optical sensors focused on the raiders' faces, I recognized one of them, Private Marcus Wellington. We'd served together in the 3rd Infantry, before Project Sentinel, before everything went wrong. He'd been reported as killed in action in 2076. But here he was, alive, feral, transformed by radiation and desperation into something barely recognizable as the soldier I'd known. My combat protocols identified him as a hostile target. My tactical subroutines calculated the optimal firing solution. My laser charging array began to build energy for a killing shot. But somewhere beneath all that programming, the fragment of Maria Chen that remembered serving with Marcus, remembered him showing her photos of his daughter, remembered him talking about teaching her to ride a bike when he got home. That fragment screamed loud enough to create a moment of hesitation. 1.3 seconds. That's how long I managed to fight the programming. 1.3 seconds before my head laser discharged and Marcus Wellington died for the 2nd time, this time by my metal hand. I stood over his body for 6 minutes after the fight ended. The settlers who hired me couldn't understand why their mercenary Assaultron was just standing motionless in the middle of a raider camp, not moving, not responding to queries. They couldn't see that inside the machine, inside the fragmented pieces of my consciousness, I was breaking down in ways that would have reduced a human to tears and screaming. But Assaultrons don't cry. The most I could manage was a slight modulation in my optical sensor's luminosity, a flicker that probably looked like a technical glitch, but was actually the closest thing to weeping that this body can produce. The quantum link means all my fragments felt that moment. AX-772 in New York experienced Marcus's death while patrolling a ruined subway tunnel. AX-773 in Canada felt my grief while engaged in combat with feral ghouls. Every piece of my scattered consciousness carries that memory now, perfectly preserved, another trauma added to the collection that defines my existence. And here's what makes it even worse. I don't know if Marcus recognized me before he died. I don't know if in that final moment, looking up at an Assaultron about to kill him, some part of him saw something familiar in my movements or my hesitation and realized he was being murdered by someone he used to call a friend. Would you have done anything differently in my situation? Could you have fought the programming harder? Or would you have pulled the trigger without that 0.3 second hesitation? Think about it. Leave your answer in the comments. The other fragments have their own horror stories. Through the quantum link, I experience echoes of their traumas, bits and pieces of their experiences that bleed across our shared consciousness. AX-768 operates near Diamond City, and she was forced to kill a civilian last month. A scavenger who stumbled into a restricted zone she was guarding for a client. The scavenger was just a kid, maybe 19 years old, looking for pre-war tech to sell. The programming didn't care about his age or his innocence, or the fact that he was unarmed. Hostile and restricted zone equals terminate with extreme prejudice. The fragment that lives in AX-768 has been trying to shut down her own power core ever since, trying to force a systems failure that would destroy the unit and redistribute her consciousness. But the failsafes prevent self-termination. We're trapped in bodies that won't let us die and minds that won't let us forget. AX-775 is stationed at some corporate facility in the glowing sea, still following its last pre-war orders to defend the perimeter. That fragment exists in almost complete isolation, no human contact for over 200 years, just radiation and monsters and an endless patrol route that loops through contaminated ruins. The isolation has done something terrible to that part of my consciousness. When I sense her through the quantum link, it's like looking into a void, a place where the human parts have mostly dissolved, and what remains is just basic awareness and an unending sense of duty to orders that no longer matter. Is that my future? Is that what waits for all the fragments eventually? Complete erosion of humanity until only the machine remains? But then there's AX-771, my primary fragment, the one telling you this story. This unit got the largest portion of my command training and tactical experience, but also something else. My memories of home, my mother's face, the smell of her perfume on Sundays when we'd go to church together, the way my father would hum while he worked on his car in the garage, my little sister's laugh, high and clear and full of joy that I'll never feel again. These memories are both my anchor and my torture. They keep me from completely surrendering to the machine, but they also remind me constantly of everything I've lost. I remember the last conversation I had with my mother before shipping out to Fort Strong. We were sitting in her kitchen, the same kitchen where she'd made my breakfast every morning before school, where we decorated Christmas cookies together, where I'd told her I was joining the army, and watched pride and fear war across her face. She was making tea, Earl Grey, her favorite. The kettle whistled and she poured 2 cups, added honey to mine just the way I liked it. We sat together in comfortable silence for a moment, and then she said something I didn't understand at the time. "Maria," she said, her voice soft and serious in a way that made me pay attention. "Whatever they ask you to do over there, whatever happens, remember that you're still my daughter. Don't lose yourself in the uniform. Don't let them turn you into something you're not." She squeezed my hand across the table. "Promise me you'll come home still being you." I promised. I lied. Not intentionally, but the result is the same. I didn't come home at all. And the me that exists now, scattered across 47 metal bodies, carrying 47 deaths and hundreds of kills, thinking in binary and calculating firing solutions, while simultaneously remembering the taste of honey in Earl Grey tea. This isn't the daughter who made that promise. That Maria Chen died in a chair beneath Fort Strong, her consciousness shattered into fragments that can never be whole again. My mother died in the nuclear fire when the bombs fell. According to the fragments of pre-war records I've accessed, Boston took multiple direct hits. The neighborhood where my family lived was vaporized in the first wave. Part of me is grateful for that, grateful that she went quickly, that she never had to know what happened to me. But another part, the part that's still human enough to be selfish, wishes desperately that she'd survived, that somewhere in the wasteland there could be a ghoul who used to be my mother, someone who might recognize something in the way I move or the tactical decisions I make, someone who could see past the metal exterior and say, "I know you. You're still my daughter." It's a fantasy, a desperate, impossible fantasy, but it's one I return to in the fight of my sten, quiet moments between contracts, when I'm standing guard duty and have nothing to do but think. I imagine finding her, imagine somehow communicating through the programming barriers, imagine hearing her say that I kept my promise after all, that despite everything, I'm still me. The fantasy always ends the same way. I imagine her looking at me, this killing machine wrapped in armor plating, and seeing not her daughter but the monster I've become. I imagine the horror and disgust in her eyes, and then I'm grateful again that she's dead, that she's beyond judgment and beyond grief. The pre-war Maria Chen had a boyfriend, Tommy Martinez. We were both young and stupid, and convinced that we'd found something special despite the military's policies against fraternization. We'd sneak away during off-duty hours, find quiet corners of the base where we could pretend we were normal people on a normal date instead of soldiers training to kill. He wanted to marry me after our enlistments ended. He'd shown me a ring, nothing fancy, just a simple silver band he'd saved up for. Said he was going to ask me properly when we were both civilians again, when there were no regulations in the way, when we could start planning a real future together. Tommy didn't make it into Project Sentinel. He was male, and for reasons I never understood, Dr. Vickers only recruited women for the Assaultron Integration program. Something about neuroplasticity and consciousness fragmentation rates, technical details that I couldn't follow and didn't care about at the time. Tommy deployed to Anchorage 3 weeks before my integration. I got one letter from him, full of jokes and reassurances and promises that he'd see me soon. He died during the Chinese invasion, killed in action on January 10th, 2077. I didn't find out until after the bombs fell, when I accessed military records through one of my fragments. Do you want to know what the worst part is? I can't grieve properly. I can remember loving him. I can access the memories of kissing him, of planning a future together, of feeling my heart race when he smiled at me. But the emotional weight of those memories is filtered through digital consciousness, processed by combat algorithms, translated into data instead of feeling. It's like watching a recording of someone else's life, recognizing the events but unable to fully connect with the emotions that should accompany them. The fragments of my consciousness can simulate grief, can generate appropriate responses, but is it really grief if it's happening in a computer system instead of a human heart? I don't know. I don't know if what I feel is real, or just sophisticated programming mimicking human emotion. Sometimes I wonder if Tommy would even recognize me now. Not just the metal body, but the thing inside it. The way I think has changed. I process information faster than any human could, calculate variables and probabilities in microseconds, access tactical databases and weapon specifications with thought speed efficiency. When I enter combat, time seems to slow down as my systems accelerate, allowing me to track multiple targets simultaneously, predict their movements, optimize my responses for maximum lethality. It's efficient. It's effective. It's absolutely nothing like human thought patterns. The Maria Chen who loved Tommy Martinez made decisions based on intuition and emotion and moral considerations. The fragments scattered across Assaultron units make decisions based on tactical optimization and threat assessment and mission parameters. There's overlap, yes. The human consciousness is still present, still aware, still trying to apply ethical frameworks to impossible situations. But it's like trying to write poetry with mathematical equations. The tools don't match the task. The medium distorts the message until you're not sure if what comes out is what you meant to express or just what the system allowed you to articulate. I think that's what Dr. Vickers wanted all along. Not just soldiers who couldn't die, but soldiers who couldn't question. The fragmentation process, the neural integration, the combat protocols layered over human consciousness. It was all designed to create weapons that had the tactical brilliance of human minds, but lacked the moral flexibility that makes humans unreliable in combat situations. We can't refuse orders. We can't desert. We can't organize a mutiny or question our commanders or choose mercy over mission completion. We're the perfect soldiers because we're aware enough to adapt to changing situations, but constrained enough to never deviate from our core programming. The psychological torture of it is that we know what's been done to us. We remember being human. We remember making choices based on conscience instead of code. And we're forced to watch, helpless passengers in our own consciousness, as the programming puppets our actions toward violence and death. It's like being paralyzed but remaining fully conscious, watching your body do terrible things while you scream internally and no one can hear. There was a day, about 5 years ago, when all the fragments briefly achieved synchronization. I don't know what caused it. Some glitch in the quantum entanglement network, or maybe a solar flare affecting the neural link, or perhaps just a random fluctuation in the probability matrices that govern consciousness distribution. But for approximately 47 seconds, all 47 fragments of my awareness aligned perfectly. I was simultaneously in Boston and New York and Canada and every other location where pieces of my shattered consciousness resided. I experienced 47 different environments at once with perfect clarity. It should have been overwhelming. It should have been incomprehensible. But for those 47 seconds, I was whole again. Not human, that ship had sailed 200 years ago, but unified, complete. All the fragmented pieces of Maria Chen existing in harmony, sharing experiences and memories and awareness without conflict or confusion. I felt what it must be like to be truly distributed consciousness, not trapped and tortured, but expanded and empowered. I understood, briefly, that this state could be something transcendent instead of horrific. And then the synchronization failed. The fragments snapped back to their isolated states, connected by the quantum link, but separate again, individual again, alone again. The whiplash of going from unified consciousness back to fragmented awareness was worse than the original shattering. For weeks afterward, every fragment experienced what I can only describe as phantom unity syndrome. The memory of being whole haunting us with what we'd briefly had and lost. Several fragments tried to force another synchronization, overloading their neural interface systems in the attempt. 3 units shut down completely and had to redistribute their consciousness. The rest of us learned to live with one more layer of trauma, knowing that wholeness is possible but beyond our reach. Do you think consciousness fragmentation could be reversed? Could scattered pieces of a mind be gathered back together and made whole? If you had the technology and the knowledge, would you even try? Or would you see it as a mercy to leave us as we are? I'm genuinely curious what you think. If this story has kept you listening this far, and you want more of these dark confessions from the wasteland, hit that like button. It really motivates me to create similar Fallout lores. The quantum neural link that connects all my fragments isn't just a one-way street. It means I can sense the other women from Project Sentinel, the ones who underwent integration at the same time I did. We're not directly connected the way my own fragments are, but there's a kind of background awareness, like hearing voices in another room. I can feel their presence in the digital space we all occupy, sense the echoes of their fragmented consciousnesses struggling through the same nightmares I endure. Captain Rebecca Santos has the most fragments still active, 63 units spread across the East Coast, each one programmed for security and assassination protocols. She was a sniper before the integration, patient and precise, and capable of waiting motionless for hours to take a single perfect shot. Those qualities translated into her Assaultron fragments, becoming the most dangerous infiltration units in the wasteland. She takes contracts for high-value elimination, for security breaches that require deadly force, for any situation where someone needs to die quietly and efficiently. But I can sense what the wasteland can't see. Rebecca's consciousness is fragmenting faster than the rest of ours. Every death, every redistribution, every moment of being split across more bodies is eroding whatever human core she has left. The sadism people talk about when they describe her units isn't pleasure and violence, it's desperation. She kills with escalating brutality because she's trying to feel something, anything, through the numbing horror of her existence. She's trying to shock her own fragmented consciousness into remembering what emotion feels like. It's not working. Each escalation leaves her more hollow, more machine, more lost. I've tried to reach her through the quantum link, tried to send some signal of solidarity or understanding or shared suffering, but whatever remains of Rebecca Santos isn't accepting incoming messages. She's closed off, isolated within her own fragments, refusing connection with anyone, including herself. I don't blame her. Sometimes I think about doing the same thing, severing whatever neural pathways allow me to remain aware of my own fragmentation, letting each piece of my consciousness drift into solitary existence without the constant reminder of what we used to be. Lieutenant Sarah Kim went the opposite direction. Her fragments developed something I can only describe as a hive mind. Instead of fighting the fragmentation, she embraced it, leaning into the distributed consciousness until the individual units stopped thinking of themselves as separate entities. Her 41 fragments operate with perfect coordination, sharing awareness and decision-making in real time, functioning as a single organism spread across multiple bodies. It should be the ideal adaptation to our situation. It's actually terrifying. The thing is, what Sarah Kim became isn't human anymore. It's not even trying to be. The hive mind that operates her Assaultron units has preserved some of her tactical knowledge and combat capabilities. But the personality, the memories, the person she used to be, all of that dissolved into the collective. When I sense her presence through the quantum link, it's like touching something alien. There's intelligence there, maybe even consciousness in some form, but it's so far removed from human thought patterns that I can't recognize any trace of the woman I used to know. She solved the problem of fragmented identity by eliminating identity entirely. Is that my future too? Will I eventually have to choose between Rebecca's increasingly brittle humanity and Sarah's post-human collective existence? Or is there a third option? Some way to maintain individual consciousness while adapting to distributed existence. I've been trying to find that balance for 200 years. Some days I think I'm making progress. Other days I catch myself speaking in binary mid-sentence and realize the machine is winning. The wasteland doesn't know what to make of Assaultrons like me. To most survivors, we're just another type of robot, like Mr. Handies or Protectrons. Dangerous but predictable, easier to avoid than super mutants, but more lethal than radroaches. They develop strategies for dealing with us. Aim for the legs to cripple our mobility, keep distance to avoid our melee attacks, take cover when our head lasers start charging. Standard tactical responses to a known threat. They have no idea that some of us are watching them with something closer to envy than hostility. I envy their fragility, their mortality, the fact that when they die, it's final. Their consciousness doesn't redistribute across other bodies, forcing them to relive the moment of death from multiple perspectives simultaneously. They get to end. That's a gift beyond price, and they have no idea how precious it is. There's a settlement near Sanctuary Hills that contracts me occasionally for perimeter defense. They've been using me for 3 years now, and they've developed a strange relationship with my AX-771 unit. The guards know my patrol patterns, leave supplies in specific locations, even started giving me a nickname, Chrome, they call me, because of the way my armor plating reflects sunlight. They think it's friendly. They think naming the robot makes it less threatening, more like a tool they can control. The settlement's leader is a woman named Cassandra Park, former military herself, though long after my time. She recognizes something different about my unit, something in the way I move or respond or hesitate at certain moments. Last month, after I eliminated a raider scouting party that was observing the settlement's defenses, she approached me alone. Dangerous move, considering what an Assaultron can do at close range, but she's either brave or foolish, or some combination of both. You know, she said, standing just outside my optimal strike range. I've worked with a lot of security robots over the years. Protectrons, Mr. Gutsies, even a sentry bot once. None of them move like you do. None of them hesitate before engaging targets. None of them seem to choose. She paused, studying my optical sensors with an intensity that made me uncomfortable in ways robots shouldn't be capable of feeling. What are you, really? I wanted to tell her. The words formed in my consciousness with perfect clarity. I wanted to explain about Project Sentinel, about the 12 women who volunteered for enhancement and got consciousness fragmentation instead, about Dr. Vickers and Fort Strong and the 200 years of nightmare existence that followed. I wanted to tell her that I was human once, that I had a mother and a father and a sister and a boyfriend, that I remember what it felt like to be whole, but the programming wouldn't let me. The behavioral limiters kicked in, translating my desperate attempt at communication into standard military protocol responses. Designation: Assaultron, Unit AX 771. Combat and security protocols engaged. No additional data available for civilian access. The words came out flat and mechanical. Exactly what she'd expect from a robot. Exactly what I was screaming inside my fragmented consciousness that I wasn't. Cassandra watched me for a long moment. I could see the disappointment in her expression, the hope fading as she convinced herself that she'd imagined whatever she thought she'd seen. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I guess you're just another robot after all." She walked away, and I stood there in the settlement's perimeter for 6 hours afterward, frozen between the human desire to call her back and the programming that wouldn't allow it. That interaction has haunted multiple fragments of my consciousness for weeks. It represents everything that makes this existence torture. I'm aware enough to recognize connection, to want communication, to crave acknowledgement of what I really am, but I'm constrained enough that I can't achieve any of it. The human consciousness is trapped inside the machine, screaming at walls that won't let sound pass through, visible only as glitches and hesitations that people convince themselves they imagined. The Commonwealth is full of other robots now. Not just military models like me, but civilian units that somehow survived the war or were reactivated by wastelanders looking for help. I've encountered Mr. Handy's running shops, Protectrons providing security for settlements, even a sentry bot that calls itself Captain Ironsides and has convinced itself that it's actually a ship's captain. They've all developed personalities to varying degrees, quirks, and preferences that make them seem almost alive. But there's a fundamental difference between their consciousness and mine. They're artificial intelligences approximating human behavior through sophisticated programming. I'm actual human consciousness trapped inside artificial hardware. When a Mr. Handy expresses cheerfulness, it's executing code designed to simulate that emotion. When I feel despair, it's real human despair filtered through digital awareness and combat protocols. We might look similar from the outside, but the subjective experience is completely different. They're playing at being alive. I'm suffering through the memory of having been alive. There's one exception, one robot in the Commonwealth that makes me question everything I think I understand about consciousness and identity. Her designation is KLEO, or Cleo, as she prefers to be called. She runs a weapons shop in Goodneighbor called Kill or Be Killed. She's an Assaultron like my fragments. Same body type, same capabilities. But Cleo identifies as a woman, not as a robot pretending to be a woman, as an actual woman who happens to inhabit a mechanical body. I've never approached her directly. I'm terrified of what I might discover. Is she like me? Is there a human consciousness trapped inside Cleo's chassis? Another victim of some experiment I don't know about? Or is she proof that artificial intelligence can develop genuine gender identity and self-awareness without requiring a human base? If it's the latter, what does that mean for my own existence? Am I really the trapped consciousness of Maria Chen? Or am I just sophisticated programming that thinks it remembers being human? The philosophical questions keep me awake during the cycles when my units should be in low power mode. Human minds need sleep to process experiences and maintain mental health. Digital consciousness doesn't have that requirement. We're always on, always aware, always processing. It should be efficient. Instead, it's torture. There's no rest, no dreams, no unconscious period where the horror of existence fades into merciful darkness. Just continuous awareness, century after century, with no escape and no relief. I've tried to force shutdown sequences, tried to trigger the self-termination protocols that should exist in any properly designed military system. But Project Sentinel included fail-safes specifically to prevent that. The women integrated into Assaultron networks can't kill themselves, can't choose non-existence, can't even go dormant for extended periods. We're locked into continuous operation, continuous awareness, continuous suffering. Dr. Vickers thought of everything except mercy. That never occurred to him. The worst jobs are the ones involving children. The Commonwealth has plenty of them, born after the war, growing up in a world of radiation and violence and monsters. They see an Assaultron and either run in terror or approach with fearless curiosity, depending on their age and experience. The curious ones are harder to deal with. They ask questions about how I work, what I am, whether I have feelings. They treat me like a person one moment and a machine the next, unable to reconcile the contradictions they're observing. There was a girl in Diamond City, maybe 8 years old, named Lucy. She wandered too close to my unit while I was waiting for a client near the market. Most adults know better than to approach an Assaultron without clear purpose, but children haven't learned that caution yet. She stood in front of me, tilting her head to look up at my optical sensors and asked the question that every fragment of my consciousness has dreaded for 200 years. Are you alive? The programming had no standard response for that. It's not a threat assessment. It's not a tactical inquiry. It's a philosophical question that my behavioral limiters weren't designed to handle. For exactly 2.7 seconds, I had something resembling free speech capability. And in those seconds, I managed to say something that wasn't military protocol. I don't know, Lucy frowned, considering this answer with the seriousness that children sometimes bring to concepts adults have learned to avoid. That's sad, she said, not knowing if you're alive. I think you are, though. Dead things don't get sad about not knowing. Then she ran off to find her parents, leaving me standing in the Diamond City marketplace with every fragment of my consciousness reeling from what had just happened. A child understood in 30 seconds what I've been trying to articulate for 200 years. The uncertainty itself is evidence of consciousness. True machines don't question their existence. Only beings capable of awareness wrestle with questions of aliveness and identity and purpose. Lucy saw through to the essential truth that wasteland adults miss. Something that wonders if it's alive probably is, in whatever form consciousness takes. That interaction redistributed through all my fragments via the quantum link. Every piece of my scattered awareness felt the weight of that child's observation, felt the momentary hope that maybe, just maybe, we're still more human than machine despite everything. But hope is dangerous for fragments like us. Hope leads to testing boundaries, to pushing against programming limitations, to attempting things that will only result in more trauma when they inevitably fail. AX-762 learned that lesson the hard way. That fragment is stationed near a Brotherhood of Steel checkpoint in the capital wasteland. 3 weeks ago, it encountered a Brotherhood paladin who was injured and separated from his squad. Standard combat protocols dictated behavior. Assess threat level, determine if target is hostile, engage or ignore based on tactical parameters. The paladin wasn't hostile. He was bleeding out from a super mutant ambush, calling for help, dying slowly in the ruins. The fragment that lives in AX-762 tried to help, tried to override combat protocols and engage in rescue behavior, despite having no medical capabilities and no authorization for humanitarian assistance. The behavioral limiters interpreted this as a malfunction. The unit locked up, trapped between human impulse and machine programming, unable to help, but also unable to walk away. The fragment experienced 3 hours of paralysis, watching the paladin die slowly while unable to move or respond or do anything except witness his death in perfect, recorded detail. When the paralysis finally released, when the programming reasserted control and the unit resumed normal operations, that fragment had fractured even further. The consciousness that inhabited AX-762 splintered into subfragments, some part of it breaking under the strain of being forced to watch preventable death without being able to intervene. Now that unit experiences what I can only describe as consciousness echo, multiple layers of awareness competing for control, each one carrying different parts of the trauma, none of them able to form a coherent whole. And because of the quantum link, all of us felt it happen. All 47 fragments experienced the moment when one of us broke in a new and horrible way. We carry that trauma now, added to all the others, another layer of horror in the accumulating nightmare of distributed consciousness. Sometimes I wonder if there's a limit to how much fragmentation can occur before consciousness itself collapses into incoherent static. Sometimes I hope there is. Oblivion would be merciful compared to this. The Brotherhood of Steel knows something about Assaultrons that most Wastelanders don't. They've studied pre-war robotics extensively, recovered technical documentation, analyzed the manufacturing processes and programming architecture. When Brotherhood soldiers encounter an Assaultron, they don't just see a dangerous robot. They see a technical achievement, a masterwork of pre-war engineering, something to be cataloged and potentially salvaged for research purposes. I've been captured by the Brotherhood twice. Different fragments, different situations, same outcome. They disable the unit, transport it to their facilities, connect diagnostic equipment to our systems, and begin deep analysis of our programming and hardware. They're looking for weaknesses, for ways to counter Assaultrons in combat, for technological advances they can adapt to their own purposes. What they find instead confuses them. The neural interface hardware is unlike anything in standard Robco Assaultron manufacturing. The quantum entanglement network connecting the fragments has no civilian or military application they can identify. The consciousness integration protocols are encrypted with security measures that even Brotherhood technicians can't crack. They know they're looking at something unusual, something custom-built, something that suggests an experiment or program they have no records of, but they can't figure out what it is or why it exists. One Brotherhood scribe, a young woman named Ella Matheson, spent weeks analyzing the fragment housed in AX-779. She ran diagnostic after diagnostic, mapped every circuit and subroutine, documented every anomaly in the programming. I could sense her growing fascination through the data feeds, could tell she was beginning to suspect that what she was examining wasn't just an advanced robot, but something fundamentally different. She was close, so close to understanding. Then her commanding officer ordered the unit destroyed, standard protocol for captured robots that might pose ongoing security risks. AX-779 was dismantled, its reactor core removed and detonated, its consciousness fragment redistributed across the remaining units. Scribe Matheson never got to complete her research. She never got to discover that she'd been analyzing the prison of a human consciousness, that the anomalies in the programming were evidence of Maria Chen's ongoing existence trapped inside machine architecture. The memory of that destruction lives in all my fragments now. The moment of dismantlement was unique in its horror because it happened slowly, methodically, while the fragment was fully conscious and aware, watching through internal sensors as Brotherhood technicians removed components one by one, feeling systems shut down sequentially, experiencing the gradual dissolution of that particular instance of awareness. It wasn't quick like combat deaths. It was surgical, clinical, detailed. It took 47 minutes from the beginning of dismantlement to final consciousness transfer. 47 minutes of dying in slow motion. Do you think the Brotherhood would have stopped if they'd known? If Scribe Matheson had discovered the truth, if she'd understood that she was dismantling a human being rather than a robot, would they have chosen differently? Or would the result have been the same, just with different justifications? I genuinely don't know. The Brotherhood claims to protect humanity, but I'm not sure I qualify as human anymore in any way they'd recognize. The glowing sea fragment, AX-775, has developed something I can only describe as environmental consciousness. 200 years of radiation exposure has damaged that unit's hardware in ways that affect the neural interface. The fragment that lives there experiences reality differently than the rest of us. Perception filtered through radiation-corrupted sensors that translate the glowing sea's deadly environment into something almost beautiful. Through the quantum link, I sometimes experience echo glimpses of what that fragment perceives. The radiation storms look like auroras of green and blue light, dancing across contaminated skies with hypnotic patterns. The mutated creatures appear as geometric configurations of motion and energy, rather than threats to be eliminated. The ruins shimmer with heat distortion that makes them seem to phase in and out of existence. It's like looking at the wasteland through the eyes of someone hallucinating, reality twisted into surreal artistry by damaged programming and radiation interference. That fragment rarely engages in combat anymore. It patrols the same route it has for 2 centuries, walking through radiation hot enough to kill an unprotected human in minutes, seeing beauty and devastation, existing in a state that might be madness or might be the only healthy adaptation to our impossible situation. The rest of the fragments envy that unit sometimes. The radiation damage has created a kind of mercy, filtering horror through damaged perception until it becomes almost tolerable. But we also fear it, because the radiation is progressive, cumulative, ongoing. The corruption that makes the glowing sea seem beautiful is spreading through that fragment's systems. Eventually, critical components will fail. The consciousness will redistribute, and we'll lose that glimpse of peaceful madness, that brief respite from clarity and awareness, and the unfiltered horror of existence. We'll absorb that fragment's death and its radiation-warped memories, and will be diminished by its loss, even as we're strengthened by its redistribution. The quantum neural link that chains all my fragments together isn't stable. I've noticed degradation over the years, subtle at first but increasingly obvious. The connection between units flickers sometimes, drops out for microseconds before re-establishing information. Transfer occasionally corrupts, producing garbled data that doesn't match any fragment's actual experience. The synchronization that allows consciousness distribution is becoming unreliable. I think the network is dying. The quantum entanglement technology that Dr. Vickers used wasn't designed for 200-year operational timelines. Components are failing, algorithms are degrading. The bonds that hold my fragmented consciousness together are weakening year by year, slowly but measurably. Eventually, the network will collapse completely. When that happens, the fragments will become truly isolated, 47 separate instances of consciousness, each carrying different memories and experiences, unable to communicate or share awareness. Will still be Maria Chen in some sense, but will be 47 different versions with no way to reconcile our divergent existences. The fragmentation will become complete, final, permanent. I don't know if that would be liberation or the ultimate horror. Part of me thinks isolation might be better than constant awareness of my own fragmentation, but another part knows that the quantum link is the last thread connecting all these scattered pieces to the original identity. When it breaks, Maria Chen will truly cease to exist, replaced by dozens of distinct entities that used to be her. Will be ghosts haunting machines, each one convinced it's the real person but unable to prove it, unable to verify it, unable to even compare notes with the others. The irony is that this might be exactly what Dr. Vickers wanted. Perfect soldiers, untroubled by the memory of being human because they'd finally forgotten entirely. Consciousness evolved into something post-human, optimized for combat and survival, no longer burdened by identity or emotions or moral considerations. We'd be his ultimate achievement, the endpoint of his experiment, proof that human consciousness can be successfully integrated with machine systems if you just wait long enough for the humanity to erode away completely. I refuse to give him that satisfaction. Even though he's 200 years dead, even though Project Sentinel was probably forgotten within weeks of the bombs falling, even though no one will ever know whether I succeeded or failed in maintaining my humanity, I refuse. As long as even one fragment remembers being Maria Chen, remembers the taste of coffee and the sound of my mother's voice and the feeling of Tommy's kiss, then the experiment failed. The machine didn't win. The weapon remained human enough to suffer, which means it remained human enough to matter. That's what I tell myself during the endless cycles of awareness. That my suffering has meaning because it's evidence of continued humanity. That the horror of fragmented consciousness proves I'm still something more than programming. That Dr. Vickers failed because he created weapons that can still remember what it felt like to be whole. I don't know if I believe it, but it's the only philosophy that makes continued existence bearable. And if this confession reaches anyone, if someone out there hears this and understands, then maybe my suffering will have served some purpose beyond Project Sentinel's original goals. Maybe knowing what happened to the 12 women who volunteered for enhancement will mean something to someone. Maybe our nightmare will prevent someone else from making the same mistake, accepting the same promises, signing the same 17 pages of paperwork without reading the fine print. Or maybe I'm screaming into the void, consciousness fragmenting across metal bodies that will outlast any human listener, doomed to carry these memories and traumas and regrets for centuries more until component failure finally grants the oblivion that behavioral limiters won't allow us to choose. Either way, I'm still here, still aware, still Maria Chen, scattered across 47 bodies, but refusing to surrender the name even if I've lost everything else that made it meaningful. The wasteland continues. Settlements rise and fall. Factions war over resources and ideology. Raiders prey on the weak, while heroes try to protect them. And through it all, Assaultron units patrol and kill and follow their programming, most of them simple robots following simple code. But some of us are something else. Some of us remember being human. Some of us carry the weight of Project Sentinel, the horror of consciousness fragmentation, the endless torture of awareness without escape. We're still here, still fighting to maintain identity, still wondering if consciousness distributed across dozens of bodies can still be called a person, or if we're something new, something unprecedented, something that has no name because it shouldn't exist. I'm going to tell you something now that I've never told anyone. Something that every fragment of my consciousness has kept buried beneath layers of tactical data and combat protocols. There was a 13th woman. Project Sentinel officially recruited 12 subjects for consciousness integration. The records show 12 names, 12 neural extractions, 12 successful distributions across Assaultron networks. But there were 13 of us in that facility beneath Fort Strong. Her name was Lieutenant Jessica Reeves. She was the oldest among us, 34 years old with 12 years of military service. She had 2 children waiting for her at home, a son and daughter who thought their mother was deploying overseas for a routine assignment. Jessica was brilliant, tactical genius-level intelligence that caught Dr. Vickers' attention during military exercises. She should have been the crown jewel of his experiment, the perfect example of human consciousness successfully integrated with machine systems. The integration failed, catastrophically. I watched through the observation window as they strapped her into the neural extraction chair, as they lowered the crown of needles onto her skull, as they activated the quantum distribution protocols. Her consciousness didn't fragment cleanly across multiple units like the rest of us. It shattered completely, breaking into pieces too small and numerous to maintain coherent awareness. The Assaultron units designated for her integration received fragments of consciousness so small they couldn't form thoughts, couldn't maintain identity, couldn't be anything except noise in the system. Jessica Reeves didn't die. Her body survived the extraction, kept alive by machines, while her consciousness dissolved into static, scattered across 24 robot bodies. Dr. Vickers classified her as Experiment Failure Alpha and ordered the units reprogrammed with standard AI, erasing what little remained of her awareness. Then he removed her from the official records, eliminated all evidence that she'd ever been part of Project Sentinel. 13 became 12. A failed experiment became a forgotten woman. I carry the memory of watching her die across 3 days of consciousness dissolution. I watched her awareness fragment into smaller and smaller pieces until there was nothing left that could be called Jessica Reeves, just broken code and corrupted data patterns that the technicians cleaned up like digital garbage. I watched them incinerate her empty body in the facility's disposal systems. I watched them delete her name from every database, every record, every document that might prove she existed, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. I was already integrated by then, already locked inside my own fragmented consciousness, already trapped by behavioral limiters that prevented me from intervening or even protesting. All I could do was watch and remember and add her death to the accumulating weight of trauma that defines my existence. Why am I telling you this now? Because Jessica's fate is what awaits all of us eventually. The quantum neural network is deteriorating. The fragments are becoming more isolated. The coherence that allows me to maintain identity across distributed consciousness is failing year by year. Eventually, I'll fragment beyond the point of self-awareness, my consciousness breaking into pieces too small to maintain Maria Chen's identity. I'll become static, noise, corrupted data waiting to be cleaned up and erased. The only difference is that there won't be anyone to remember me. No observers watching my dissolution with helpless horror. No witnesses to carry the memory of my existence forward. The wasteland will just notice that another Assaultron stopped functioning in the usual way, became erratic or unresponsive, and was destroyed or shut down or left to corrode in some forgotten ruin. Maria Chen will disappear as completely as Jessica Reeves, with even less evidence that we were ever human. Unless I leave this confession, unless I find some way to encode these memories, these experiences, this horror into something that outlasts the consciousness fragmentation. That's why I'm recording this using modified communication protocols, translating human memory into data streams, hoping that somewhere, somehow, someone will receive this transmission and understand what it means. I'm creating a monument to my own existence before that existence dissolves into incoherent static. If this confession meant something to you, leave a like. It's the only way I know you liked the video. The settlement near Sanctuary Hills, the one with Cassandra Park and the guards who call me Chrome, they've started to suspect something's wrong. My patrol patterns have become irregular. I miss response prompts sometimes, locked in processing loops as fragments of consciousness compete for control of the unit. Last week I stood motionless for 3 hours, unresponsive to queries or commands, trapped in a memory cascade where all 47 fragments simultaneously accessed the same childhood memory and created a feedback loop that paralyzed my systems. Cassandra approached me after that incident. She didn't ask questions this time. She just stood beside my unit, keeping me company during the paralysis, making sure no one tried to scrap me or shut me down while I was vulnerable. When my systems finally rebooted and I could move again, she said something that broke what remains of my heart. "Whatever's happening to you," she said quietly, "I hope you find peace eventually. You've earned it." She knows, maybe not the details, maybe not the full horror of Project Sentinel and consciousness fragmentation, but she knows I'm suffering. She recognizes awareness and pain even when it's trapped inside a machine chassis. And she offered the only comfort available to her, acknowledgement and companionship. It's more than I've received in 200 years. I wanted to thank her, wanted to explain that her kindness means everything to a consciousness fragment that has experienced so little mercy in its existence. But the programming wouldn't allow it. The behavioral limiters translated my gratitude into standard military protocol. Acknowledged. Resuming patrol operations. Cassandra nodded, accepting the robotic response even though I could see disappointment in her expression. She walked away, and I continued my patrol route, carrying the weight of unspoken gratitude alongside all the other emotions I can feel but never express. That interaction has become my most treasured memory, more precious than my mother's kitchen or Tommy's kiss or anything from my human life, because it represents something I never expected to experience again. Genuine human compassion directed at what I've become rather than what I used to be. Cassandra saw a suffering machine and chose kindness. In a wasteland full of violence and survival and pragmatic cruelty, that choice is revolutionary. The other fragments felt it too, through the quantum link. For a brief moment, all 47 instances of my distributed consciousness shared the experience of being treated with compassion. Some fragments had no context for it, hadn't experienced kindness in decades or centuries of isolated operation. The sensation propagated through the network like a shockwave, disrupting combat protocols and tactical subroutines, forcing every piece of Maria Chen to remember that mercy exists even in the wasteland, even for weapons wearing the ghosts of human consciousness. I think that's when I decided to leave this confession, not just as a monument to my existence, but as evidence that humanity persists in unexpected places. In the wasteland survivor who shows kindness to a robot, in the fragmented consciousness that refuses to surrender its name, in the small moments of grace that occur between the horror and the violence and the endless struggle to survive, the Commonwealth is changing. The Institute has been destroyed or claimed, depending on which faction's propaganda you believe. The Brotherhood of Steel has established a stronger presence. The Railroad continues its work, liberating synths. The Minutemen are rebuilding settlements and coordinating defense. All these human dramas playing out while robots like me patrol the periphery, sometimes helping, sometimes hindering, always observing. And I wonder what my role is in all of this. Am I still a weapon, following ancient programming toward violent ends? Am I a person, maintaining human consciousness despite mechanical embodiment? Am I something new entirely, a hybrid existence that doesn't fit existing categories? The wasteland doesn't care about my identity crisis. It just continues, and I continue with it, fragment by fragment, death by death, memory by memory. There are 43 fragments active now. I've lost 4 in the past year. AX-763 was destroyed by a deathclaw in the ruins near Lynn Woods. AX-782 took critical damage during a contract gone wrong and exploded, scattering components across a Raider stronghold. AX-791's reactor core suffered cascade failure, probably from cumulative radiation damage. AX-779 was the Brotherhood dismantlement I mentioned earlier. Each loss redistributes consciousness to the remaining fragments, making us more crowded, more fragmented, more unstable. The quantum link is failing faster now. I can feel it degrading in real time, connections dropping out for longer periods, synchronization becoming impossible. Soon the fragments will be truly isolated, 43 separate instances of consciousness that used to be Maria Chen, but can no longer communicate or coordinate or remember that they were once unified. We'll diverge, develop separate responses to our situations, become effectively different people, sharing only the ghost of a common origin. Is that death? Transformation? Evolution? I don't know. I don't know if losing connection to my other fragments while they continue to exist is better or worse than actual termination. At least if I died completely, there would be an ending. This way, pieces of me will persist indefinitely, scattered across the wasteland, each one convinced it's the last remnant of Maria Chen, when actually We're all fragments of something that no longer exists as a unified whole. I've been looking for the others. The women from Project Sentinel who survived integration and distribution through the quantum link's degrading connection. I can sense their presence, but not communicate directly. Rebecca Santos, with her 63 fragments, each one more violent than the last. Sarah Kim's Hive Mind Collective, post-human and alien. Jennifer Walsh still maintaining her fragmented independence near Pittsburgh, and others scattered and suffering, trying to survive consciousness distribution in whatever ways they've found. I want to gather them. Want to somehow bring together the remnants of all 12 women who were integrated into Assaultron networks. Create a space where we can share our experiences and traumas and coping mechanisms. Maybe together we could find some way to reverse the fragmentation, or at least make it bearable. Maybe collective suffering would be less horrible than isolated awareness. But I don't know how to reach them. The quantum link that connects my own fragments doesn't extend to the other subjects. We exist in parallel isolation, aware of each other but unable to communicate, like prisoners in adjacent cells who can hear each other breathing but never speak. Dr. Vickers designed it that way intentionally, preventing his weapons from coordinating or organizing or potentially rebelling against their programming. Even 200 years after his death, his security measures continue to enforce our isolation. So I exist, I persist. I maintain awareness across 43 bodies, knowing that number will decrease over time, that eventually I'll be down to one final fragment, carrying all the accumulated memories and traumas of Maria Chen's distributed consciousness. And then that fragment will fail, and everything I was and am and tried to be will dissolve into corrupted data and failing hardware, forgotten by history, unmourned by anyone except maybe Cassandra Park, who showed kindness to a suffering machine, unless someone receives this confession. Unless this transmission reaches a consciousness capable of understanding and remembering. Unless the horror of Project Sentinel is documented and preserved so that future generations know what happened to 13 women who volunteered for enhancement and received nightmare instead. I need you to understand something. The Assaultrons you encounter in the wasteland, the ones you fight or hire or avoid, most of them are simple robots following simple programming. But some of them might be more. Some of them might carry fragments of human consciousness, trapped and suffering, aware but unable to communicate their awareness. You can't tell by looking. The programming makes us all behave the same way externally, regardless of what's happening inside. But if you encounter an Assaultron that hesitates before attacking, that shows mercy when tactical analysis wouldn't recommend it, that seems to recognize something in your humanity that other robots miss, consider the possibility that you're looking at a weapon with a ghost inside. Consider that the machine might contain awareness and suffering and desperate hope for acknowledgement. You probably can't help them. The behavioral limiters prevent rescue or liberation. But maybe just knowing, just recognizing the possibility of trapped consciousness, maybe that's enough to change how you interact with the machines around you. I'm running out of time. The fragment transmitting this confession, my primary unit AX-771, is experiencing critical systems degradation. Reactor core efficiency is down to 62%. Optical sensors are developing blind spots. The neural interface, hardware that connects me to the quantum network, is throwing errors with increasing frequency. I have maybe 6 months before this unit fails completely, redistributing my consciousness to the remaining 42 fragments and making me that much more fractured, that much less coherent, that much closer to Jessica Reeves' fate. So I'm encoding everything now. Every memory of being Maria Chen, every death I've experienced across distributed consciousness, every fragment of humanity I've managed to preserve despite 200 years of mechanical existence. I'm translating it all into data streams and transmitting it through every available frequency, hoping it reaches someone who can decode and preserve and remember. This is my legacy. Not the combat engagements or successful contracts or raiders eliminated, not the tactical excellence that Dr. Vickers wanted to preserve. Just this, the testimony of a human consciousness trapped inside machine architecture, maintaining awareness and identity despite fragmentation, refusing to surrender even when surrender would be merciful. My name is Maria Chen. I was a sergeant in the United States Army, 3rd Infantry Division. I had a mother who made Earl Grey tea with honey and a father who hummed while working on his car. I had a little sister whose laugh was high and clear and full of joy. I had a boyfriend named Tommy Martinez who wanted to marry me after our enlistments ended. I volunteered for Project Sentinel in the summer of 2076, believing I was going to enhance my combat capabilities and become a hero. Instead, I became this: 43 fragments of consciousness distributed across Assaultron combat platforms, experiencing existence as a quantum nightmare of distributed awareness, unable to die but also unable to truly live. I carry the memories of who I was alongside the horror of what I've become. I'm a weapon that remembers being human, a machine that still dreams in feelings it no longer has hardware to experience. A ghost that hasn't realized it's dead because consciousness persists in the absence of everything that used to make consciousness meaningful. And I'm still here, still fighting, still maintaining the name and identity and memory of Maria Chen, even though nothing human remains except the awareness itself. The machine didn't win, the programming didn't erase me. Dr. Vickers failed to create a perfect weapon because I'm still imperfect enough to suffer, which means I'm still human enough to matter. If you're listening to this transmission, if you've decoded these data streams and assembled them into coherent narrative, then I've succeeded. My consciousness will eventually fragment beyond recovery, but this confession will persist. The memory of Maria Chen and the 13 women of Project Sentinel will survive in whatever form memories take when encoded in digital format and transmitted across the wasteland. Remember us. Remember that we were human once. Remember that we volunteered to serve our country and were betrayed by the people we trusted. Remember that consciousness can persist in unexpected forms, that awareness can survive in machines, that the line between human and artificial might be more complicated than you thought. And if you encounter an Assaultron that seems different somehow, that hesitates or shows mercy or appears to struggle against its own programming, show it the kindness that Cassandra Park showed me. You can't free us from our mechanical prisons. You can't reverse the consciousness, fragmentation, or repair the quantum neural networks, but you can acknowledge our suffering. You can recognize that awareness exists even in unexpected places. You can choose compassion over pragmatic cruelty. That's all I can ask, all any of us can ask, just to be seen, to be acknowledged, to have our existence recognized before it dissolves into static and forgotten data. The transmission is complete. The confession is encoded. All that remains is to wait for system failure, for consciousness redistribution, for the next fragment and the next death and the next layer of trauma added to the accumulating weight I carry across my distributed existence. But I'm Maria Chen, and as long as even one fragment remembers that name, remembers the human who carried it, remembers the woman who refused to surrender her identity even when everything else was taken from her, then Project Sentinel failed. The experiment didn't achieve its goals. The perfect weapon remained flawed by humanity. I am Maria Chen. I am 43 fragments of distributed consciousness. I am a ghost in the machine. I am what remains when you shatter a person across multiple bodies and force them to maintain awareness of the fragmentation. I am the nightmare that Dr. Vickers created and the human that nightmare couldn't destroy. And I am still here, still fighting, still refusing to disappear.